Okay, well, welcome to Dev Faction. This is where we learn, mingle, and create. And we do that on so many topics that it would make your head spin. So just check out the monitor there. Come to our website at /lectures. You can find all the lectures, and at /tutorials, you can find all of the tutorials. Thanks to our admin team, this is a fantastic production. All of them work very hard on this. Codecraft, our main sponsor, sponsors our space and our pizza, so big thank you to them. Boulder Digital Arts helps us with the cameras, audio, and provides us a studio in the back that this all pipes into. Boulder Beer, the tasty brew, I think you guys would all agree it's tasty, right? They supply that for us, yeah. And something really cool about Boulder Beer is they are actually Colorado's first craft brewery, so really cool. Check them out. They actually have a restaurant on site at their brewery, so if you guys ever have a chance. All right, let's give it up for James Hatch. He's going to do Getting Started with React. All right. Woo!
All right, cool. Well, let me just get an idea of who I'm talking to here. You guys mostly in boot camps, pre-boot camp, post-boot camp. A lot of you guys. Boot camp at all. No boot camp at all. Some of you guys in Codecraft right now? Post. Most of you guys are post. Cool. All right, well, perfect. I'll transition perfectly into who I am. About this time last year, in March, April, May, I was doing a boot camp in San Francisco called App Academy. We learned Rails, SQL, JavaScript, React, Flux, HTML, CSS, probably a good amount of the same stuff that you guys learned, minus Node and Angular, both of which I've written some apps in as well now. So. Yeah, and then I finished that, and just to kind of commiserate with you guys, if you're in the job search process, I did spend maybe 2 or 3 months grinding really hard, sent out 300 job apps. Yeah, jumped through all kinds of hoops, did a bunch of interviews. So it took me a while to get a job, but I got a contract on a pretty easy, low rate contract. Did a really good job, and that company hired me on full time with a good position. So keep fighting the good fight is the point of that. If you enjoy doing this, keep doing it. So yeah, I mean, I was having fun doing it, so I was okay to do it 10 hours a day until I found a job doing it. So my first contracts once I moved here was with Creative Circle and Bridgeview IT. So if those ring a bell at all, or you guys want to talk to some of those guys, let me know. So we'll dive in. We're talking about React today, obviously, which was what was the main focus of my school. And so this is mostly a comparison between React and Angular, because it's pretty much the most popular framework. And a lot of companies do use Angular, so by no means should you quit using Angular if you already know how to do it. Keep using it. But some of the benefits of React that Hank can attest to, he went through Codecraft and learned Angular. And so this is why I feel good evangelizing React, is because I sold him on it coming from Angular. So it makes me feel strongly that it is as good as it seemed to me. One of the big parts about it that separates it from Angular is MVC. It's all of the parts of the model view controller paradigm. Whereas React is more just a view, and it's called a library instead of a framework. And what that means is that it's quicker and easier to learn. It's a lot more lightweight. It's less opinionated, meaning you have a lot more freedom to use it how you want. You can choose which parts you want to use for the model and the controller. Like Flux is very popular. Or Redux now, integrates with React, and that would be the model side of things. So it's a lot more freedom. There's less boilerplate code. You'll see when we look at a simple React component, it looks a lot cleaner and just a lot less code going on there. And also I think it's a lot more logical, hierarchical structure when you're putting together your components and your HTML elements. It makes more sense in your head to understand how they're coming together than in Angular. And then going to some more technical things, React uses this thing called the virtual DOM, which essentially, I mean, you guys know what the DOM is. Basically, the DOM it's very heavy and very inefficient to traverse the DOM and try to decide, like, if you clicked on a button, jQuery has to search the DOM, find the button, find the event handler, and it takes a lot of CPU processing power to traverse the DOM for a lot of things. So what React does is basically creates its own version of the DOM, and as you manipulate elements on the page, React makes the changes in its virtual DOM, and then process called reconciliation reconciles that with the actual DOM, and essentially it just reduces. It's a much more efficient process. It knows right where to look on the actual DOM because it's already figured out where to look on the virtual DOM, which it can do a lot quicker. So that's a big reason. In case you guys didn't know, Facebook created React. Their software developers invented and built React, and so Facebook is built on React, and you can imagine the heavy load on a Facebook page. We'll pull mine up in a little bit to kind of break it down, but yeah, you can imagine with how all the buttons and all the stuff going on there that you need a framework that's light and efficient in traversing a DOM. And then finally, these things called lifecycle methods I found to be very useful with React, and we'll talk about those in a second. So one of the key principles of React is the idea of state and props, and that's based on this single responsibility principle. Is that something you guys have heard of at all? Basically, it's the idea that, like, you want a function to do one thing, right? And not try to, and same with, your DOM components. You don't want one component that's got 10 different buttons and different features in it and handles the processing for all these different components. You want to split those out, and React kind of helps you visualize how you're going to break things out into individual components that control one piece of the puzzle at a time. And sort of what goes into that is this idea of state and props. So state would be like the component, one particular component owns its state, and it manipulates its state. And I'll show you an example of this soon. It'll make a little more sense. But essentially, a component is the arbiter of its state, and it's something that's mutable and dynamic, such as, the app that I built in here is a click counter. Every time you click, it increases 1. So that number, that total click number, needs to be increasing. It needs to be dynamic and update every time you click. So that would be a concept of state. Props, on the other hand, is something that is passed down from a parent component down to a child. And the idea is there is like maybe the parent has its state, and this child component needs to know that state, but you don't want it to be able to manipulate it. So it passes down its state as props to a lower component, but that child component can't edit it. It's immutable. And then this is what I was talking about with lifecycle methods. So basically, whenever your React component's about to go on the page, this is like the order of operations. This is pre-built functions that you can use. And again, I think when we dive into the demo a little bit, it'll make a little more sense. But for instance, if a perfect example of this is, let's say that you have a list of items, let's say it's pictures on a web page, but you only want to display those pictures if someone clicks the button that says, like, display the pictures. So until that person clicks the button, you don't want to have preloaded all and have gone to the server and gotten 100 pictures, because that's an inefficient process. And why go get all those pictures if they're not even going to click the button? There's no reason to get it. So in the component that holds the pictures, if they click the button, that component might go get the pictures in the component will mount. Like, oh, the button was clicked. I'm about to be on the page. We better go grab those 100 pictures now to display. So that's one example of using these lifecycle methods. And now we'll pretty much dive into a demo, and hopefully some of this stuff will become a little more clear. Last but not least, these are some, as it says, auxiliary tools that work really well with React. You can use React without any of these, but I haven't, and I wouldn't recommend it. That's just everything about it makes it cleaner and easier to use. And so JSX is an XML-like structuring. It's going to be what we build our components in. It's a JSX file. We build them in JSX. And then Babel just takes that JSX code that you just built and turned it into actual JavaScript so that it can be read on the page. And so you'll see really soon here how you build essentially an HTML structure just how you want it in JSX. Babel turns that into JavaScript and puts it on the page. And then last but not least, Webpack, which is essentially dependency management. So it's like if file 1 needs file 2, and file 2 needs file 5, and file 5 needs file 1, you don't get stuck in a dependency loop where they're all requiring each other. Webpack looks at everything that requires everything else, and then it bundles all of these dependencies and files into one. All right. So I know a lot of that was probably confusing without having seen the code, but I thought it'd be easier to have an idea of these principles as we go into it, and then we can sort of review all the things I just said about them as we go through them. So, what's
Connection with Redux? Is that
the connection with Redux? Yeah, so like I was saying before, like React is just a view, right? So it doesn't control where the data is coming from, or basically data management. So if you have like a list of, if your page wants to display an index of users, 20 users, Redux would be something that interacts with your database and packages those users however you want it, and then sends that information to React, or to the components, which are React components. So it's sort of the model in the MVC framework.
If you're going to use React with a database, it would be a good idea to have Redux, probably.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you use it without Redux, though.
Right.
But Redux is a way of sitting between you and the database and making it easier to communicate with it.
Yeah, it sort of logically separates things out so that you don't have to, the component, it could be getting data from anywhere, and it creates a logical flow of data comes from the database, it goes into Redux, then Redux sends it to the component.
Okay.
Is essentially.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're fine. I'm on that point. If you have questions about stuff I'm talking about, jump right in. This is
Similar to Flux.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Flux
Well,
at all?
I've been hearing about both of them, but I thought just a second ago you were almost insinuated that Flux turned into Redux, or
Well, Redux is
Redux as a revision of Flux in some ways, a better revision of Flux.
it is.
But it's totally separate, right? So Flux still exists.
Yes, and Flux is more of an architectural pattern of like data flow, and just instead of leaving it up to you to decide, you just follow the Flux pattern of how the data goes into and out of a database, or your server and your backend. So Flux kind of creates a streamlined loop.
You may be going over this in the next few seconds, so if I jump the gun, sorry. But are these React is going to be installed through npm? You're running it on Node.
Yep.
And Redux as well gets installed through npm.
I believe so. I'm not using Redux in my example.
It does.
Yeah,
Okay,
it does.
Sorry, I'm just playing the noob over here.
No, just go for it.
Okay,
That's the more fun part than sitting here quietly
Keep it
talking to an empty.
That's right.
But yeah, you'll see that in a second. We're going to install all the goodies. So I've already built something, and I'm basically going to go through the steps of building it again real quick.
Can you make that bigger? Or
Yeah, absolutely. Is that good enough?
That's good.
Okay. All right. So if you guys, are a lot of you here because you want to build a project in React, or are you just like more curious in general about React?
Just in general.
Yeah. Well, because I was going to say, if you want to start a project in React, feel free to like pull out your computer and follow along, and at the end you should have a working React app. But for now, you guys, all this will be on GitHub, and I'll post the slides on GitHub and stuff too. So, all right. So I'm on my desktop. I'm just going to make a new directory, call it Hello World 2. Oh, I already made that earlier. Call this one Hello World 3. And then we'll go into it. And first thing we're going to do is init npm init --yes. And
Dash, dash, yeah, oh, it just makes it so you skip all the enter.
yep. Yep, creates the package.json file. I'm sure you guys are familiar with this stuff. And then pull up my cheat sheet of steps. And then we're going to install all of our necessary external libraries. Where's my... I got rid of it. Mistake. All right, I got to go find the list of dependencies that I have to download.
Can you just look at your other package.json? It's right there.
Yeah, that's a good call. Crushed it.
It's easier when the camera's on.
Here, I'll make that bigger for you guys too. All right, so we need React, React DOM, Webpack, Babel Core, Babel Loader. And we need this preset ES 2015 so that it can read ES6. Yeah, and I don't know if I mentioned this, but Babel is just what's known as, go ahead.
Wait, that was part of dependencies, not dev dependencies, right? Just like make sure it was on that.
A part of dependencies rather than dev dependencies?
Yeah.
It could be in either.
Okay. I just
Yeah, I honestly don't have a straightforward answer. I mean, I think you can put it in both. I'm not 100% sure if it needs to be in dependencies for your site to work, but my
It
get.
only needs to be in dev dependencies, but being in dependencies, the dev will still pick it up. I thought dev dependencies was for testing.
Yeah, it's a different environment. I mean, if you're going to launch, this app to production, then you'd want to put it in just your basic dependencies and not nest it within dev dependencies. That's all you're doing. If you nest it within dev, all you're saying is, I need this in my development work, but I don't actually need this when it gets to production. So I put it within dev, but it's not completely necessary.
So that applies to a group of like debuggers or external.
Exactly. A debugger would be a perfect example of something you put into dev dependency because you don't need that in the production app. Okay, so I think I got them all. Guess we can look at my package.json. Open this bad boy up and add them. All right, Babel Core, Babel Loader, Babel Preset, React DOM. Looks like we got them all. And again, I'll give you guys these steps. It's really easy to recreate once you just go through these one step at a time. It's not as hard it's not as confusing as it looks. All right, so then the next thing we're going to want to do is basically set up our index.html file, which will be, self-explanatory. And I'm just going to copy over the HTML from here.
Which was Wi-Fi?
Oh, learn in bold. It's the Wi-Fi is classroom, and the password is learn in bolder.
I got like that.
Uppercase, I is uppercase, and bolder is uppercase. Yeah.
Got it? All right. So we create our index.html, and you're going to want to give a root node, essentially. This is a lot like Angular, I'm assuming. You sort of give it the root entry. And then React is going to grab that and inject all the other components and all the other HTML. So that's all you need in your index file. And then we need to create an entry file. We're not going to quite go over this just yet because the next thing we have to do is set up Webpack. Have you guys used Webpack at all? Yeah? All right. Well, the reason I ask is because I've never actually, you don't really want to have to build it from scratch. You don't want to open a config file and try to build it all from scratch. I'll leave that open so you can see. Sorry, these won't get bigger. No, they won't. So this is basically what I'm saying is I've copied over my Webpack file from a previous project every single time, and then make adjustments just based on what I know I'm using, or even I've copied one over and there's been a bunch of errors and I've figured it out. But I think it's easier than trying to build out your whole own Webpack file from scratch. So if I was you and you were going to go start a React project, copy this off my GitHub, because this one's very simple and it will work for you. If you follow the steps that I give you and use this Webpack file, it will work.
We'll also include this, the final version of this tutorial on our website, on our GitHub.
Cool.
Everybody can access it.
Nice. I wish I'd made it a little bit prettier, but didn't have time for CSS, so. But yeah, and so, like I said before, Webpack is going to, this is basically telling it like, grab all these files with these extension endings and put them into this file called bundle.js. So all of my components, all of like my eventual components, and really that's about all we have. But in a bigger project, it'll have like your CSS, all that good stuff. It condenses it all and puts it into, go ahead.
It's sort of like a CSS preprocessor where you can have multiple like partial files, and but at the end you just have that one CSS file.
Yep.
Same thing.
Yeah, it's like Gulp if you've ever used Gulp.
Multiple files and multiple file types as opposed to like just the CSS.
Yeah. Yep, that's exactly right. And it also, like I said, it's basically two parts. It condenses all of your individual files into singular files, and it manages dependencies. Like if 3 different of your files require jQuery, then it will control that and only require jQuery once instead of letting all 3 files individually go grab jQuery. So it manages dependencies and it condenses files.
So this script is on your GitHub.
It will be.
What?
It will be.
Will be. Okay, so, well, when somebody watches this, it'll already be there.
Yes.
So, is this a script that you basically wrote from their documentation, or you had to go glean this from somewhere, or write it up specifically yourself, or this was just something you found, modified slightly?
My first one was from one of our boot camp entry projects to Webpack.
So to use Webpack, you need to have some kind of script to get started that they're not going to supply.
I'm sure they give you like a somewhat templated version of this file on their website, or they tell you like the different parameters like entry, output, module. They tell you what these different things do.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you can choose like DevTools source map. We don't need that. That's not something that is needed for the project to work. And what that does is, because everything gets compressed into bundle.js, let's say you have an error in one of your files. If you don't have source map in there, then it's just going to say you've got a file or an error in bundle.js on line 1085.
Right, okay.
Whereas if you have source map in, it'll say it's actually on entry.jsx line 10. So
This is probably relatively easy to use. I just have never used it. Probably.
Webpack,
Is it?
I mean, it's a little tricky.
Okay.
It's one of
So
them.
it would be good to start with the script based on whatever you're doing.
Yeah, I would do both. I would go to Webpack's website, look at the template, and like look at the different options they give you, and then try to make sense of, like this file. Go to Webpack's website and understand what each one of these things is doing.
So is Webpack what's enabling you to use require in your front-end code?
Yes.
Is that how that works?
Yeah.
So I'm accustomed to just using script tags or whatever for my front-end code. So I'm actually not sure. I'm a little curious. What happens if you have 3 front-end JavaScript files that are all requiring jQuery? Does jQuery get loaded 3 times into your page?
If you aren't using something like Browserify, Webpack, whatever, then yeah.
That seems wasteful.
Yeah, definitely, and that's why you want to use one of these tools.
It seems really curious because I know in Node, if you have a similar kind of situation, you have 10 files all requiring some other file.
Yeah.
That one required file only gets loaded once.
Right, and you're actually right. Like if you use npm kind of does that for you. npm flattens dependencies. That's what it's called. So if you're using npm, I think it does the same thing, and you don't have to have Webpack for it to not require it 3 times. If you npm installed those, then it will only use them once. Or it only use the version that you npm installed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Now this is running on Node though, right now, right?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Not Node. I mean, there is no, Node is, like server code. There's no server here.
Oh, right, no server, but it's still
Are we gonna use
running on
Redux?
local host off of some kind of node.
Not off localhost.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's just opening an HTML file.
This is, okay.
It's
I
just,
guess I thought I saw, I thought it said node modules, but it isn't.
well, I mean, yeah, I had, this is where,
Something else I'm looking at?
well, this is where like Babel and, well,
That doesn't mean you're running a node server. for
Okay,
node modules.
you can still have that folder there.
Yeah, I'm
It-
no,
You can
Angular
have that
will have
folder.
a node modules folder.
Grabbing things from it and using it.
yeah.
Okay,
You can use you use NPM to grab libraries like say jQuery.
Right.
So I could use NPM just to grab jQuery and put it in my project, but
Right.
not use Node in any other way.
Okay.
So that's sort of what this is doing.
Is,
NPM is node.
is the Webpack dev server, is that,
Yeah.
so is that, used with, is that a node module, is it like, is that a node in itself?
I think,
Like,
I mean, it spins up a server on your, so I think it's a Node server, yes.
yeah, but that's kind of like the cool alternative you can use though, right? Like, cause I don't know, I've used it around some boilerplates before.
Yeah. Yeah, using Webpack
Just reload,
to run your server, yeah. I mean, it just creates a simple Node server that, yeah.
loading.
Yeah, the reload. And I mean, I still have it I can still use, you don't have to use run server. Like I'm running right here, I'm running Webpack and it's still picking up on all my changes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and so if I go into a file here and then, let's see, if I just go into here and mess this up, it'll throw an error and be like, something's wrong with that file. So you can use Webpack to watch your files without running the server.
Okay.
So Webpack run server is kind of a different thing. Why can't I click it in here? I think my Atom might be frozen. All right, well, hopefully the other one's working. Cool, that one's working. Yeah, I don't know what happened with this one. Let's close that. All right, so just to recap real quick. You open up a new folder, you npm init, you npm install your packages, and then you have to make the Webpack config file. And so real quickly, just diving in here. So we made this entry.jsx. That is what Webpack is going to use as the entry file when it goes to display your index page, and then all the other code is compressed into bundle. So I'm going to go ahead and need to reopen that other project. Oh. Okay, so now we're finally going to start writing some React. We've set up all the guts, we've set up Webpack, we've got all of our packages in there, and now we need to, first thing you're going to want to work on is your entry file. And this is all it looks like. I'll probably quit hopping back and forth at this point. But yeah, this is what your entry file, the basic parent React file. I think there's some analogs to this in Angular. And you're just essentially going to grab that element that's on your index page, this guy, and then inject your parent React component, which is, for me, is app. So use this thing called React DOM. That's the virtual DOM. And essentially it just grabs that root element and throws the component that you feed it in there, and that's app. And so then we'll go into app and see what we're doing there. So, you start thinking about this like HTML structure, and you could think about it like, it's going to inject, this app div, and that'll be like the parent piece of HTML that all of your other HTML goes in. So it'll be like the body, essentially, of your React page. And then that will, that's where you start creating your component hierarchy. This is like the most parent component. And then you can see I'm injecting another React component in here called homepage. So let me see. I don't know exactly how deep to dive into this. So I won't dive too deep. So quickly, let's pop over to the homepage. But this is something like you were talking about how you can have these different templates and throw them around, whatever. Like I can put this homepage tag in any of my JSX files, and it'll inject this HTML into there. So homepage is like a template, and then you can throw that around wherever, throw that component around wherever. If you had other pages that you wanted to put in here, you could put them in here. And because this is like the parent component, you'd sort of put all of the main bodied pages under there. So we'll hop into this one real quick.
Quick question on the homepage stuff. So is using that homepage and then the separate file, is that sort of similar to like if you were building like a WordPress site how you could separate out the different PHP files so that if you want to change the header, you just change that header file. You don't have to change it on every page. Is that sort of the same idea? Or
Yeah, I've never actually used WordPress, but absolutely, like homepage could have just easily been header. Like in one of my actual projects, I can open up for you. Like,
if you need to add another link to the menu, you just change that one file and then it updates on everything else.
yeah, totally.
Now, is this just like Angular 2 where like all the stuff that's included in that specific spot is not going to ever affect anything else where on the other imports? Because like Angular, for instance, what I noticed, which I think is really cool, is if I use one class in one component and I accidentally use the same class in a different component, I'm not gonna have issues.
Yeah, I don't know about class name collisions. That's an interesting question. I'm not totally sure if that would work out the same way.
That accidentally, but
There's no collisions
no
across, like using the same CSS class.
Yeah,
It works across multiple components.
right. But the CSS would apply to
So
both.
if I said like, header, 1 pixel red border, right? In this one, and then I used the .header class on something else, which probably wasn't a header, that's a bad example. But I used it on something else in a different component. In Angular, it wouldn't go look for that CSS class in that other component. It just
But you compartmentalize the CSS into that component, right?
Yeah, the CSS.
Yeah, you don't really do that with React.
React.
You have a separate CSS file, so it would apply to both of them.
That's more WordPress acting than Angular would be acting, because you would still get your CSS no matter what you grab. You grab.
Yeah, so that's more how it is. Yeah.
CSS.
You can have the CSS in the template or in the component, but it just makes it way messier.
Yeah, in this instance it would, wouldn't it? I would imagine.
Yep.
I like it better in the style sheet.
Yeah.
So here we are. Real quick, I'll try to wrap this up quick. Just kind of talk about some state and props going on in here. So initially, when this component loads, every time this component, every time you go back to the home page or wherever this component's on, it's going to recall this function, which essentially just is where you can set your state if you want to have a state for your component. So every time it loads, it's going to reset this state to 0. And then you can see I've put a function in here called increase count. And this is the sort of the meat and potatoes of why it's fun to develop in React, is that you can build out your HTML structure exactly how you want it to be on the page, and then start injecting some React cool JavaScript stuff in here, versus like in Angular, these would be in separate files. You'd have your template HTML file, and then you'd have your controller file, which has all these functions like increase count. This function would be in a controller that's in a separate file than your HTML.
It is, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And so the cool thing about this is that you get to basically build out HTML in each one of your individual components. And you can look and see like homepage component, like here's the HTML for it, and here's all the associated functions.
Why do you need to bind increase count?
That's a good question. You didn't have to do that in Java, in ES5. and for some reason in ES6 you have to do it. I mean, obviously it loses the context of this when it injects this HTML into the page. This has no meaning to it anymore. It doesn't refer to like this file. Like, see, it's like this dot increase count. So it's referring in this context to this function right here. But once this HTML gets injected on your page, it no longer knows what this is. So when you call this dot increase count, it's like, where's increase count?
That's funny, because that looks really redundant.
I mean, have you used bind before? Are you familiar with it? Yeah. Yeah. So this is just saying like, when you inject this into the page, bind whatever this was in the original file, like bind the scope of this to this file. Yeah, talking about this is always very confusing. Yeah, so real quick, and then you'll see, so I put this onClick function. So, I mean, it's a lot of like just like making jQuery-esque things cleaner. Like you have to build out an onClick function. You can put it in line with the element. And then this is my function. It's going to change the state. And then this div is displaying that state. So this is, in a way, it's a circular way of doing two-way data binding, right? So like I'm changing the state from the page, which every time you change the state, it re-renders this page, and then you're injecting, your state into here. And then this is a quick little example I made of props. So I have one more component called message display. And you can see this does not have a state. All it has is this is how you pass props. And so this is the parent component, and it's giving this message to this child component. And the child component has no say in what the message is, cannot change the message, can't edit it. All it can do is receive it from the parent and then do what it wants to, in this case, display it. So it receives the props from the parent, and then it just sets that as a property, and then displays it.
And within that component, you would be able to then set up a new state for that component and then manipulate its data without manipulating what's passed in, and then
exactly.
Whatever, et cetera.
Totally, yeah. That's the exact idea. Is message display can have its own state and be manipulating its own data that it's concerned about within its component, while not messing with the message that it got passed from its parent.
Question on that, sorry. So with things like Bootstrap or Foundation or those CSS frameworks, sometimes you'll be like, okay, I want to make a card and it has like divs within divs within divs and all sorts of CSS with it. So would you be able to like take that and then make the component there so that all that other stuff is kind of hidden in a way, and then all you have to do is call that custom component?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so like message display could have like divs within divs within divs. Like this could be,
With class names and all
yeah,
that stuff.
and then on the home page it just says it's just message display. Definitely, yeah, and that's part of what's beautiful about it is you chunk out these chunks of HTML that seem like a logical grouping, and you say like, all right, I'm going to go group that together, and then you just add them back up into a hierarchical structure. Like app is the top, it has two components that then have three components each that then have, and so it sort of separates those out. So if you want to just look at the overall structure and you go to the app file, it's not like div, 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 div. It's just like the overall structure, home, nav bar, body, footer would be like the three components in app. And then if you want to go into each one of those and drill down further, but yeah, totally, that's one of the big selling points of it. All right, let's take a look at this bad boy real quick. Open up index.js. Woo! That is a good-looking app, if I do say so. So this is all you need to see.
So other than data binding, which is what I understand, Angular and React both do very well, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing
Technically,
is they're separating the structure so that you have a better way of putting your components together.
templating out HTML, if you will, and
And then the other thing they're doing is they're also modifying the way you can write JavaScript in some areas. Right?
Yep.
Because obviously you're still going to use a lot of regular JavaScript, or you might even import jQuery at some points if you felt felt like it.
Yeah.
But in general, this will give you some tools so you don't have to write as much JavaScript.
Totally, and that's, levels of abstraction, if you will.
Yeah.
All of this starts as machine code, and then they invented C so that you didn't have to write machine code, and then they invented JavaScript so that you didn't have to write.
And now there's Angular.
And now there's React, so you don't have to write vanilla JavaScript. You can write something cleaner than vanilla JavaScript, and then Babel turns that into JavaScript.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
So this index.html page, that when you have it in Atom just has like, put my stuff here. Is it Webpack that takes all the information and then creates the HTML? Like basically, I guess what I'm wondering is like, so you create, these different pages and the different JavaScript files,
Yeah.
but then let's say you want to put it onto a web server somewhere. What's sort of the process that is in between to make it all
Yeah.
an actual HTML page as opposed to just these
Right.
fragments?
So a couple things to note here. I probably should have mentioned that we're scripting in the bundle.js, which is the compile, the Webpack file that it crams everything into. If I've got 20 JavaScript files, crams them all into here, and then runs that script on the page. So this is sort of how Webpack's big ball of files gets into this. But then as far as entry file is what's then grabbing that root element or grabbing that root ID. This could be named anything. And then I'd change it here. So it's really your entry file that says, all right, find that element in your index and then start injecting React components into that.
So actually, okay, so maybe I'm just trying to get my head around this. So that index.html file, because it has that .js, the bundle.js, that is sort of what makes the page work. So if you took the bundle.js and the index.html and you just put it on a server, it would look correctly because Webpack is creating the JavaScript file, correct?
Yep.
So it's not so much like if you had Sass, for example, you can't just put all the partials onto a server and it'll automatically work.
Right.
This is sort of taking those two pieces, and then once you've got those two, you can put that wherever you want and it'll function.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, obviously, getting it actually set up and running on a server is trickier. There is plenty of documentation for how to get a project that's built in React and Webpack onto a server. But yeah, essentially all you need is the index.html and the bundle.js. And that would even take care of if you had CSS that you wanted to add on, that would all go into the bundle.js still. So as long as, all you need is the index.html and the bundle.js.
You wouldn't even need to install your node packages from that. I mean, if you were to send somebody the bundle.js and the index, that's all that they need. They don't have to install their node packages or anything. They just open up index.html, it points the bundle, and you're off.
I think in this case, yes, because the other packages we have, like Babel, that's going to get done before it gets into the bundle. It's going to run through Babel. JSX, it's already been transpiled from JSX to JavaScript. So yeah, bundle has all the JavaScript or all the necessary stuff to display the page. Yeah. All right, well, I could go on forever, but I think it's probably a good time to wrap it up. Thank you guys for bearing with me.